Hello and welcome to another episode of Flower Breeding. In this episode, we'll talk about Louis van Houtte, the mentor of Victor Lamon. He was born in 1810 and died in 1876 at the age of 66. In his youth, he worked at the Ministry of Finance in Brussels and spent his free time studying plants, both at various botanical gardens and private estates, gradually building connections with wealthy men and gardeners. His father was a military engineer, and his mother expected him to follow in his father's footsteps. In 1832, he founded the Belgian Horticulturist, a monthly magazine dedicated to horticulture. At roughly the same time, he opened a shop in Brussels to sell seeds and gardening equipment. During this time, he became more interested in tropical plants, as they were pouring into Europe en masse at that time. During this time, he also married. His wife unfortunately died only after a short period of time. In his sorrow, he accepted an offer from a plant collector called Parfron Davon to go to Brazil and collect orchids and cacti. This job was handed to him by the King of Belgians, who wanted orchids and a botanical barn that would take new seeds. The magazine and shop was handed over to the botanist Charles Morin. In January 5th, 1834, he sailed to Rio de Janeiro. Due to poor conditions, they were unable to reach Rio until 1834 May. During these intermediary times, he visited the Cape Verde Islands, where he explored the island and collected a few specimens. Upon reaching Rio, he went to the Tijuca Mountains and climbed Corvado, explored several other areas within the Rio area. He lingered there for 4 months alongside an English settler, Mr. March. During this time, he wrote several different travel journals talking about the geology, flora, and fauna of the landmasses surrounding this area. He then left towards Minas Gerais, lingering there for 7 months. Subsequently, he visited several other areas such as Mato Grosso, the Goiás, Sao Paulo, and Parnana. Please excuse the butchery of the Brazilian names. After doing his work for 2 years in Brazil, he returned to Belgium at the end of 1846 with many botanical specimens, becoming the director of the Botanical Garden of Brussels. He also founded his own Belgian Royal Horticultural Society, modeled after the one in the later years of his life. He worked with a gardener in Ghent named Adolphe Paperlo to create his own nursery. The latter individual came from a wealthy family and had financial backing with him. During this exact same time, Van Houtte founded another magazine, Fleurs de Journées d'Europe, in 1845, and continued to publish this magazine until 1876, the date of his death. During this time, he employed many different still-life painters who painted the different varieties of plants in its collection that he was selling, as well as various lithographers. During this time, he also served as the mayor of Ghent for almost 20 years, and also married again and had a son, Louis Jr., and 2 daughters. So respected he was that a French rose breeder, Jean-Claude Deschier, named one of his roses after Louis' daughter, Marie van Houtte. In his many greenhouses, began propagating palm trees, orchids, and ferns, especially ferns, who he believed would become a popular ornamental plant going into the future. He waited a few years before going into hybridization seriously, however. He was also the first person on the continent to get a giant water lily to flower at that time period. During this time, one of his hired hands began hybridizing with aquatic plants, breeding new varieties of water lily, the first of which flowered in 1847. Mr. Van Houtte also did his own breeding, tinkering around with different varieties of blue water lily for breeding purposes. One of its varieties won a gold medal in 1855 in a plant competition based in Australia. He later found another bit of talent through another plant breeder named Benedict Rosol. He was a plant collector who lost his arm in an industrial accident. He collected orchids from the South American hinterlands. The natives, who became terrified at the sight of his hook hand, basically did what he wanted. He became the principal orchid breeder within his company. Rosol also played a role in helping Van Houtte hybridize begonias together, creating hybrids between various species. As time went on, he also began expanding his interest in breeding different varieties of plants such as Barbacinia, tuberous begonia, and a lot of ornamental camellias. He also bred a great many roses. There was almost no plant in popular culture of that time period that did not get crossbred through his hands. After he died in 1866, his widow and child carried on the business until 1889, where it became a corporation. After World War I, the business suffered heavily and was eventually purchased in 1920 by a nurseryman called Charles Peinart. Everything else was later purchased by the Ghent government and was converted into a public park, leaving only a statue that still bears his name. But his long legacy lives on. And that about covers everything. Thank you for watching.